Imagine opening the Bible and stepping into a world where God seems to be two very different beings. In one moment, he is the mighty and fearsome Yahweh of the Old Testament, a God who parts seas with a whisper, brings plagues upon nations, and commands armies to conquer and destroy. This is the God who demands loyalty, enforces strict laws, and wields power with undeniable authority, a deity of fire, thunder, and unyielding justice. Then, in the turn of a page, the narrative shifts. You find yourself in the New Testament, where the atmosphere is softer, warmer. Here, God is a loving Father who walks among the poor and the broken, embodied in the gentle and compassionate figure of Jesus Christ. This is a God who touches the untouchable, forgives the unforgivable, and speaks of mercy, grace, and redemption. A God who preaches love for enemies, forgiveness without limits, and grace that washes away even the darkest past. How can these two faces belong to the same God? How does the stern lawgiver become the gentle redeemer? Are we looking at two halves of a greater whole, or is there something more mysterious at play? This is the enigma at the heart of the Bible, a story of divine duality that has fascinated, perplexed, and challenged believers for millennia. It is a journey through ancient scrolls and sacred texts, where the human quest to understand the nature of God has been both a source of profound faith and deep controversy. This story is not just about the verses on the page, but about the centuries of debate, hidden writings, lost gospels, and daring thinkers who have tried to reconcile these two images, or even dared to question if they could be reconciled at all. To uncover the truth, we must venture beyond the well-trodden paths of tradition and into the shadowy corners of history, where the voices of the lost and the silent still whisper secrets of a different understanding of the divine. We will explore the Gnostic vision of God as a being beyond the creator of the material world, the suppressed texts that tell a different tale, and the powerful counsels that shaped Christianity as we know it. This is not just a journey through Scripture. It is a journey through the very heart of faith itself, where every question leads to another, every answer opens a new mystery, and every step brings us closer to a God who cannot be easily defined. Are you ready to step into the mystery? Are you prepared to look beyond what you think you know and explore a God whose nature might be more complex, more profound, and more beautiful than you ever imagined? The story awaits, full of power, paradox, and a divine enigma that has captivated humanity for thousands of years. This is the tale of the God who is both a warrior and a shepherd, both a judge and a healer, the God of fire and grace, justice and mercy, mystery and truth. Controversy. The Bible presents a complex portrayal of God that has been the subject of theological debate for centuries. In the Old Testament, Yahweh is depicted as a God of justice, power, and often wrath, a deity who commands obedience and enforces strict laws. He leads Israel with displays of might, such as the plagues in Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, and the conquest of the Promised Land. His actions are sometimes harsh, commanding the destruction of cities, exacting vengeance, and punishing disobedience to maintain order and purity among his chosen people. This portrayal paints Yahweh as a ruler whose justice can be severe, emphasizing the need for holiness, loyalty, and reverence. By contrast, the New Testament presents a radically different image of God, primarily through the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. This is a God of love, mercy, and forgiveness, one who seeks to reconcile with humanity and calls for compassion, humility, and grace. Jesus speaks of turning the other cheek, forgiving enemies, and prioritizing the poor and the marginalized. He emphasizes inner transformation, focusing on the spirit of the law rather than strict adherence to rules. The central message of the New Testament is one of redemption, not through fear or power, but through love and sacrifice. The stark contrast between these depictions has led many to question whether they refer to the same deity. Some theologians argue that the difference reflects a fuller picture of God's nature, his justice balanced with his mercy. Theologians often emphasize that Yahweh's harshness must be understood within the historical and cultural context of ancient Israel, a time when survival required strict boundaries. In this view, God's justice and law in the Old Testament set the stage for the mercy and grace revealed in Jesus. Others, however, see these portrayals as contradictory, suggesting they may reflect different understandings of the divine that were eventually merged into a single narrative. This interpretation is not new. Early Christian groups like the Gnostics challenged the continuity between the Old and New Testaments, viewing Yahweh not as the ultimate God, but as a lesser, flawed being. They saw the God Jesus described as a higher, more transcendent reality, one of pure light and love, far removed from the material world's imperfections. The Gnostics' alternative views were controversial and ultimately labeled heretical. By the 4th century, mainstream Christian doctrine emphasized a unified view of God, connecting Yahweh's actions in the Old Testament with the grace of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. This unified doctrine was solidified through church councils and doctrinal decrees, creating the foundation of Christian orthodoxy. However, the underlying question persists: how can a God who demands obedience and enacts severe punishment in the Old Testament be reconciled with the God of unconditional love in the New Testament? Some propose that the Old Testament's depiction of God reflects humanity's early understanding of the divine, a more primitive grasp of God's nature that evolves over time. They suggest that the Bible's narrative is a progressive revelation, moving from strict justice to transformative grace. Others maintain that God's justice and mercy are two sides of the same coin, necessary to understand the fullness of his character. This duality, they argue, invites believers to delve deeper into Scripture, seeking a God whose nature transcends simple definitions and invites mystery. The Old Testament's portrayal of Yahweh is often intense and formidable. He is a God of action, delivering Israel from Egypt, guiding them through the wilderness and leading them in battle. His presence is manifest in natural phenomena like fire, smoke, and storms, emphasizing his power and holiness. Yahweh's relationship with Israel is covenantal, bound by laws that define worship, morality, and social justice. He is a God who demands loyalty, punishes disobedience, and commands awe. Stories like the Great Flood, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the conquest of Canaan highlight a deity who does not hesitate to use force to accomplish his will. In contrast, the New Testament presents a God of gentleness and compassion. Jesus, the embodiment of this God, teaches a message of forgiveness, love, and inner purity. He associates with outcasts, heals the broken, and challenges the religious authorities who emphasize legalism over mercy. Jesus' teachings focus on the heart's transformation rather than outward conformity to rules. His ministry is a call to a higher righteousness, one that loves enemies, forgives debts, and seeks peace. This vision of God as a loving Father, rather than a distant judge, has become central to Christian theology. The tension between these two depictions raises questions about God's nature. Some suggest that the severity of Yahweh's actions was necessary for ancient Israel's context, a culture of tribal warfare, survival, and the establishment of a nation. Others propose that the Old Testament's justice is not at odds with the New Testament's grace, but complements it, reflecting a God who is both holy and loving. They argue that Jesus' message of mercy is only understood fully against the backdrop of God's justice. However, early Christian sects like the Gnostics found these contrasts irreconcilable. They viewed Yahweh as a lower God, the demiurge, who created a flawed material world. For them, Jesus was not here to affirm Yahweh, but to transcend him, revealing a higher God of light and truth. The Gnostics emphasized secret wisdom, gnosis, and personal spiritual awakening, challenging the emerging orthodoxy that placed Yahweh at the center of the Christian narrative. This view was quickly deemed heretical, as it threatened the Church's efforts to maintain continuity with Jewish tradition and a unified Christian doctrine. By the time of the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, the Church had established a single narrative that affirmed Yahweh as the same God revealed in Jesus Christ. The Old and New Testaments were canonized as a cohesive scripture, despite the tensions between them. This decision created a complex theological framework where the God of wrath and the God of love were seen as one, a unity that has been debated ever since. The Gnostics, an early Christian movement, offered a radically different view of God and reality. They believed the material world was not the creation of the ultimate God, but of a lesser deity, the demiurge, whom they identified with Yahweh. According to Gnostic texts, the demiurge was a flawed and arrogant being, mistakenly believing himself to be the supreme ruler. This flawed creation was seen as a prison, a place of ignorance and suffering. The true God, for the Gnostics, existed beyond this material realm, pure spirit and light, waiting to be discovered by those who sought spiritual knowledge, gnosis, for the Gnostics. Jesus was not a redeemer who came to die for humanity's sins, but a revealer of hidden truths. He was a divine messenger, imparting secret knowledge that could awaken the divine spark within each person. His teachings, they believed, were not about adherence to external laws, but about personal transformation and enlightenment. The goal was to transcend the material world's illusions and connect with the true God, who was far removed from the flawed reality of the demiurge. This worldview posed a direct challenge to the emerging Orthodox Christian Church, which sought to establish a coherent doctrine that connected the Old and New Testaments. The Gnostics' rejection of Yahweh as the supreme God threatened the foundation of Jewish Christian tradition. As a result, Gnostic texts were labeled heretical, and their ideas were suppressed by church authorities. Writers like Irenaeus and Tertullian wrote extensively against Gnosticism, reinforcing the narrative of a unified, all-powerful God who created both the material world and offered salvation through Jesus. The suppression of Gnostic beliefs was not just about theology, it was also about authority. The institutional church claimed to be the mediator between God and humanity, interpreting divine will through tradition, sacraments, and hierarchy. The Gnostics' emphasis on individual spiritual awakening undermined this authority, suggesting that each person could access the divine without the church's mediation. This idea was seen as dangerous, leading to the exclusion of Gnostic writings from the official biblical canon. Despite the church's efforts, Gnostic ideas did not entirely disappear. Some texts were hidden away, buried, or preserved in secret by believers who valued their spiritual insights. It wasn't until the 20th century, with the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library, that many of these writings resurfaced, offering a glimpse into the diverse spiritual landscape of early Christianity. These texts reveal a Christianity that was not yet solidified, where different interpretations of Jesus' teachings coexisted, and where the nature of God was still a matter of intense debate. The Gnostics remain a testament to the diversity of early Christian thought, challenging the unified narrative that emerged from the Church's consolidation of power. Their writings continue to invite questions about the nature of God, the purpose of the material world, and the path to spiritual enlightenment. In 325 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea, a turning point in Christian history. It was not only a theological assembly, but a political maneuver to unify Christian belief under Roman rule. By the 4th century, Christianity had spread widely, but was fragmented by diverse theological interpretations. Constantine saw the potential for a unified Christianity to stabilize his empire, so he called bishops from across the Roman world to settle key theological disputes, particularly concerning the nature of Jesus Christ. The council's primary issue was whether Jesus was of the same substance as God the Father, a question with significant theological and political implications. The conclusion, affirming Jesus' full divinity, became the basis for the Nicene Creed, a declaration of Orthodox Christian belief that established the Trinity. This decision not only solidified the Church's teachings, but also centralized authority within a growing church hierarchy. Those who opposed the Council's conclusions, like Arius, who argued that Jesus was not equal to the Father, were declared heretical. The decisions made at Nicaea also had profound effects on the biblical canon. Texts that did not align with the Council's doctrine were excluded from the Bible. Gospels like the Gospel of Thomas, which emphasized personal enlightenment, were marginalized, while texts supporting a unified narrative of Jesus' divinity were preserved. The Council's conclusions were not merely about spiritual truth. They were a political effort to create a cohesive Christian identity that reinforced the Church's authority and aligned with Roman power. Constantine's involvement marked a significant shift in the Church's relationship with politics. Christianity, once a persecuted faith, became intertwined with the Roman state. The boundaries between religion and politics blurred, and the Church's doctrine became a tool for unity and control. The Nicene Creed, still recited in churches worldwide, became a symbol of Christian orthodoxy, while dissenting voices were silenced, their texts hidden or destroyed. The Council of Nicaea set a precedent for how religious authority would be exercised in the centuries to come. It established a pattern of defining orthodoxy and suppressing alternative views, shaping Christianity into a faith that was both spiritual and political. The decisions made there continue to influence how Christians understand God, Jesus, and the nature of the Church's authority. Following the Council of Nicaea, the Church continued to consolidate its authority, seeking to establish a unified Christian doctrine while actively suppressing alternative interpretations. This effort led to the persecution of groups and individuals who promoted beliefs that did not align with the Orthodox narrative, solidifying the Church's power and defining what was considered true. Christianity. One of the earliest targets of suppression was the Gnostic movement. The Gnostics, with their emphasis on personal spiritual knowledge and a mystical understanding of God, were seen as a direct threat to the Church's emerging structure. The Gnostic texts, which often presented a view of God and Jesus that differed from the canonical Gospels, were declared heretical and banned. In response, Church leaders convened councils, issued decrees, and employed excommunication to marginalize and silence dissenting voices. The Church's goal was clear: to maintain control over Christian doctrine and prevent the rise of interpretations that undermined its authority. The campaign against the Gnostics was just the beginning. Throughout the Middle Ages, any group that challenged the Church's teachings faced severe consequences. One notable example was the Cathars, a Christian sect in southern France with beliefs similar to the Gnostics. The Cathars rejected the materialism of the Church and saw the physical world as corrupt. They promoted a dualistic view of existence, emphasizing spiritual purity and a God who transcended the material realm. Their influence grew, leading Pope Innocent III to declare the Albigensian Crusade, a brutal military campaign that resulted in the massacre of thousands of Cathars and the destruction of their communities. To enforce doctrinal conformity, the Church established the Inquisition, a powerful institution designed to identify and punish heresy. The Inquisition employed interrogation, torture, and public executions to root out those who deviated from orthodox beliefs. Heretics were often forced to recant under threat of death, and those who refused faced imprisonment, torture, or execution. The Inquisition's reach extended far, from dealing with theological disputes to targeting individuals accused of witchcraft during Europe's witch hunts, a campaign fueled by fear and a desire to maintain control. The Church's suppression extended to sacred texts as well. The biblical canon, established by the 4th and 5th centuries, was closed, and texts that did not align with church doctrine were excluded. Books like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which presented alternative views on Jesus' teachings and emphasized the role of women, were dismissed as apocryphal and banned. Similarly, the Book of Enoch, which contained fantastical visions of angels, demons, and cosmic battles, was excluded because its themes did not fit the Church's emerging theology. This pattern of exclusion was not just about protecting doctrine. It was also about power. By determining which texts were considered sacred, the Church controlled the narrative of Christianity. Alternative texts were labeled as dangerous, false, or heretical, while the approved canon reinforced the Church's authority. This exclusionary process continued for centuries, with the Church taking great care to preserve its version of Christian truth while suppressing diverse and mystical interpretations. Despite the Church's efforts, alternative beliefs persisted. Some texts survived in secret, preserved by small communities who refused to abandon their faith. Others were hidden away, buried in the sands of the desert, or copied and passed down in secret. It was not until the 20th century, with discoveries like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library, that many of these writings resurfaced, shedding new light on the rich diversity of early Christian thought. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in 1947 in the Qumran caves, included ancient Jewish texts that provided insight into the religious landscape during the Second Temple period. These texts revealed that different interpretations of Scripture coexisted, challenging the idea of a unified and consistent understanding of God. Similarly, the Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in 1945, contained a treasure trove of Gnostic texts, including the Gospel of Thomas and other writings that emphasized personal spiritual awakening. These discoveries have had a profound impact on the study of early Christianity, revealing that the Church's narrative was not the only path. The alternative texts provide a glimpse into a world where multiple interpretations of Jesus' teachings flourished, highlighting a faith that was far more diverse and complex than the unified narrative established by the Church. They challenge modern readers to reconsider what it means to follow Jesus and invite believers to explore a broader, more inclusive vision of spirituality.